Blessings. Welcome to today's Law Enforcement Daily Devotional. Today we're in 2 Kings and we're in chapter 21 where we've read verses 1 through 18. And then we read a second account in 2 Chronicles chapters 33 verses 1 through 20. And they are different. There are some things in 2 Chronicles that aren't in 2 Kings. But after that, we go to Isaiah and read chapter 40, which is not an account of either one. So we'll talk about that. First off, in chapter 21, verse 1, we see that Manasseh uh, succeeds his father Hezekiah. And Hezekiah was he was a great king. And then there came a point where he messed up and he turned from God at the end, which is really sad because I love Hezekiah. But there's a point where he's really sick and he cries out to God. We read this yesterday. God gives him 15 years. And in those 15 years, he had Manasseh. And we see that when Hezekiah dies, God gave him another 15 years. Remember that. When Hezekiah dies and Manasseh becomes king, Manasseh is 15 years old. No coincidence. So, Manasseh, in verse 2, we find out right off the bat, Manasseh does evil in the sight of the Lord. It also says this in 2 Chronicles chapter 33 that Manasseh did evil on the side of the Lord. And it goes on, especially in 2 Kings here, it goes on to explain what kind of evil we're talking about. He didn't just um, tear down God's places of worship. He built up, he intentionally built up Asherah poles and different places of worship. He reestablished the worship on the hills and high places, which you weren't supposed to do. He sacrificed his children to these false gods. He consulted mediums and spiritists, and he did a lot of really evil things. And he just continued to build on this spiritual adultery to the point where he caused more spiritual adultery in Judah than any king of Judah that came before him. And then in 2 Kings just kind of leaves it like that. It talks about him shedding a lot of innocent blood in the meantime, but just evil acts, and then it just stops at 21, and that's all it says. But when you go to 2 Chronicles, it also details these evil acts, this spiritual adultery that Manasseh led the people in. But then all of a sudden, there's this ray of sunlight that says God sent Assyria against them, and they captured him, and they led him away. And he humbled himself greatly, and he prayed to God, and he cried out to God. And we know what happens when people humble themselves before the Lord. God relented. God even sent him back to Jerusalem and allowed him to continue to be king. And he was king in Jerusalem for 55 years. But after he humbled himself, he truly became a follower of God. It's just really interesting that his father was great up to a point, and then he flip-flopped and didn't end well. Well, Manasseh is this horrible, most evil king of Judah, and he flip-flops and he ends well. Um, it's just a really interesting thought. There's a lot of kings that do that. They start off good, end bad. There's a lot that start bad, end good. Um, there's some like David who start good and end good. So there's no pattern here. Um, but I think what it says is if you're good and you're following the Lord, um, you can't rest on your laurels. You've got to keep it up and finish well. Uh, you start coasting and thinking you got it made and you're going to screw up. On the other hand, if you've lived a bad life and you've done a lot of bad things, there's still hope for you to turn and come back to the Lord. Just a beautiful picture of what can happen for each of us. And then real quickly, Isaiah chapter 40. I'm not going to go too much into this because I hope you read it. It's just a beautiful prophetic chapter. It talks about John the Baptist. It talks about Jesus and Jesus being the shepherd. And it's really beautiful. And I'll be honest, when I was reading it, I wanted to read it, the whole chapter, and not have to stop and take notes or look things up. So I didn't do much. I just I read it, just wanted to take it in because it really is a beautiful prophetic chapter. So if you haven't read it, read Isaiah 40. It's really cool. Tomorrow we're in Isaiah 41, 42, and 43. So read up, come back here, and we'll see if we can find a law enforcement takeaway. And in the meantime, you guys be safe.